This is part 3 of setting up OpenSquiggly on an Amazon VM. So in part 1, we launched the instance, and in part 2, we ran that setup script and installed OpenSquiggly. It should now be running. So we can now hit that web server. So what I want to do is I'm going to get the public IPv4 DNS of that instance, and you're always free to create a DNS name and register it with your DNS provider and all that, but we haven't done that. So I'm just going to go straight to that publicly available DNS name. And so, bam, that's going to take me to the login screen. And there's no accounts yet. So the first thing I need to do is create an account. The invitation code is gander shell. And I'm going to create my login ID. You want to make sure that you pay attention to this login ID. When you log into OpenSquiggly, you log in with your login ID, not with your email address. So be sure to take note of that. I'll fill out the rest of these fields and create an account. I won't show that part. All right, after I've created the account, I get this welcome message, and then I can then sign in. Right, and that's going to give me a completely blank home page. You can use OpenSquiggly like a wiki, so you can author documents internally. And so let's just test that out very quickly. I'm going to go and edit my home page. I can append some content, and I'll just say, here is my home page. Obviously, this is just a very quick and simple test just to prove that we can, author pages. Okay, now if that's all OpenSquiggly allowed you to do, it wouldn't be really all that much different than other wikis that are on the market. But the thing that makes OpenSquiggly different is we can now curate content that comes from multiple locations. And so what I do is I click on my login ID here, and I'm going to bring in content from an external connection, or it's a private repository which requires an external connection. So let me just do that. And what I want to do is I want to connect to my OpenSquiggly account, which is the account that where my source code is that I'm interested in. Now, obviously, for you would connect it to whatever project you were doing. We support 4 types: Azure DevOps, Bitbucket, GitHub, and GitLab, as well as a generic Git host, so it could be anywhere. All right, so we won't talk about this too much, but let me just, I already have a personal access token, so I'm going to put that in. All right, so OpenSquiggly is going to be the name of the connection, and I'll put in my personal access token, and I'll use OpenSquiggly as the same name for the description and the organization name. Now this has to be, would correspond to your organization name that's in your account, in my case, in Azure DevOps. So I'm going to save that. All right, and now what I want to do is I can now start to connect to private repositories that use that. So what I want to do here is I'm going to call this OpenSquiggly source code. And I'll say why I want to do that in just a second. And the project name is OpenSquiggly, and the repository name is OpenSquiggly. Now, these would be, obviously, this again would be dependent on your account, whatever project name is inside Azure DevOps, and then whatever repository you're trying to create inside that. Azure DevOps has a 3-tiered organizational system. You have your organization. Inside the organization, you can have multiple projects, and inside the project, you can have multiple repositories. So that's why, in the case of Azure DevOps, we're specifying both the project name and the repository name, and then the organization name is coming from the external connection. Now on GitHub and GitLab and Bitbucket, it's only a 2-level organizational scheme. So anyways, I'm going to save this. And that says cloning in process. All right, and now it's cloned it. Now I can graft that. I can graft that newly created mount point into my page structure. So I'm going to call this full source. So mounting the repository itself does not create the document in your document tree. That's what you do to create a mapped page. All right, and so now see here, I now have access to all of that external content in the form of my source code. So this is the actual open squiggly source code. Going to source, blah, 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 blah. All right, point is that I can see it all. All right, now the next thing I want to do is I want to get access to my open squiggly documentation. If I go in here, notice that I have a docs folder. But if I look at my docs folder from the point of view of my source code, it's just going to give me all the raw, just the raw content of that. What I really want to see is my formatted documentation. And so in Open Squiggly, we have a way to do that. And I'm going to do an add new, and I want to say I want to reuse an existing repository. I want to call this Open Squiggly documentation. All right, and this time the start path is going to be /docs because that's where my documentation is. And instead of saying tree format type is standard file, raw file, and folder names, I want to choose this Open Squiggly simplified document tree formatter, and I save that. All right, and now what I can do is I can go and graft in the formatted documentation. I'll just call this documentation, right? And so you can kind of see what I'm doing here, where I'm able to curate source code and documentation that comes from all kinds of different places. And we could keep going with this, right? We could keep adding, all kinds of different repositories from Azure DevOps, Bitbucket Cloud, GitHub, and GitLab. So we could, depending on how much time we spent connecting to external repositories, we could have a whole smattering of all kinds of interesting stuff very quickly in our account, right? Because we're not authoring this internally. We're grabbing this and curating it from external places. All right, but anyway, so now that I brought that in, I can see that I now have formatted documentation for my project, and that's what I want. And now what I can start to do is I can start to customize this document tree however I want it to look like, all right? And so what I might like to do is say I want to add sibling above here and call this Open Squiggly, all right? And then let's say I want to put my documentation into that folder and my full source into that folder. So now I've got everything that's Open Squiggly related tucked away into this folder so I can collapse it up and not be distracted by it. All right. And then I might want to add some more stuff here. Let's say add child at the bottom. Let's say I create daily logs, maybe for note taking. All right. And and then let's say I want add something below, let's say maybe personal notes, right? And so I could use this kind of like a note-taking system. Add something below, maybe I want a file cabinet to put various miscellaneous types of documents that I want to file away. Well, another thing I like to do here too is under my Open Squiggly, then I want to create two folders, one called archived work. So as I work on bugs and user stories, all right, and then add sibling below, and I want this to be current work. So I can have two folders here for my active work, and then when I get something done, I move it into my archived work folder. So that's generally how I like to organize things. Maybe I decide I want my Open Squiggly to be first. And so now here you see I now have this nice curated thing for note taking, for documentation, for source code, and I can start to pull all of this information together. Anyway, so that was a test of uh, post setup on Amazon. And that concludes this video series for setting up OpenSquiggly on Amazon. Thank you for watching.